Why are you interested in sharing your story?
I haven't met anybody who's gone through exactly what I've gone through, and I think it would be helpful to for other people who may run into this situation to hear my story, to know that they're not the only ones out there who have had to make big decisions. And
Yeah. Why don't you go back
Okay.
and just tell your story from the beginning.
so Taylor was our third pregnancy, and I went in at 39 weeks. She was a healthy baby girl. Everything was perfect, going well. I went into the hospital in labor, and my water broke, and things were not right. There was a lot of blood when my water broke. Baby's heart rate dropped, and so they rushed me into an emergency C-section, put me out. I had a thing called vasa previa, which is a blood vessel on your placenta. It's not always detected in pregnancy, and what happened was it made her bleed out. And so by the time they got in, she had lost a huge amount of her blood. And so they had to revive her, and they worked a very long time at reviving her, but she was revived, and they immediately put her on a cooling system. She was frozen for 72 hours, so kind of in a coma-like state. Couldn't touch her, couldn't do anything. And then they start warming her to see kind of what the damage has happened. And the cooling is supposed to prevent further damage from happening. It kind of freezes everything and leaves it so the body can heal itself. So when she warmed, we didn't get the result that we thought we would. Sorry. We were hoping that there would be kind of a more reaction. And when she warmed, there was a lot of tests done. But she had no swallow reflex. She had no gag reflex, She kept bleeding, and we didn't know what the problem was. So she was having to she had blood transfusions for 7 days straight, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. On the fourth or fifth day, her intestine ruptured, and so we had to decide on emergency surgery. But they didn't want us to do the surgery if we weren't going to keep her alive, because we didn't know what state she was in. We had a big conflict with the doctors at the hospital because they didn't want to do this life-saving procedure if we weren't going to continue on with doing every single thing possible to make her live. But she was in a lot of pain. That was the only response that she had, was to pain, and she was crying. So we decided to do the surgery. During the surgery, she coded, and they revived her, and they cut out a part of her intestine, and she had a bag put on. I think a day or two later, the results from the brain scan came back, and it was determined that she had global brain damage. So she, in plain terms, the doctor told us she would never be able to sit up. She would never know that she had siblings. She would never know who we were, and she'd never experience happiness or joy. She didn't have that capacity. Pretty much what was left was just her cerebellum, which allowed her to breathe on her own. She looked perfectly normal. You would look at her and not guess anything was wrong. She didn't have tone or anything that you would expect. That just hadn't come yet. And we also knew that one whole tract of her spinal column was knocked out due to the blood loss. Her organs, she had multiple organ failure from losing the blood. They shoot all the blood up to the brain to try to save the brain. That's the last thing that your body tries to save. And so all of her organs were in failure, but they were starting to try to come back, and there were things that we could do. But when we heard about her brain, I think my husband and I had come from a medical background, and we know that a brain can be plastic and it can make new connections. And we were really hoping that there was enough good brain left to make those connections. But the neurologist explained to us that there just wasn't. There just wasn't enough to connect. There were too many holes to make connections, to make things possible for her to be able to live a functional life. I didn't care if she was in a wheelchair the rest of her life and she was on a feeding tube. I could handle that. That was something I was prepared to take on. But the fact that she would not know that she existed in this life, that she was a shell of a person, I think was just too much for my husband and I. We didn't think that would be fair to her, to be trapped in a body that she didn't know she was even here. And so at 15 days of life, they called us in, and we had to make a decision whether we were going to continue care and do everything we could or to pull life support. But the only life support that she had was a feeding tube. So, because she could breathe on her own. And so we decided to pull the feeding tube and essentially let her starve to death in the hospital. And the hospital was really kind in letting us stay there until she passed away, but it took her another 15 days to pass away from it. And it was extremely painful to sit and watch the choice that you've made play out in 15 days, knowing that at any moment you could give her a feeding tube and she would still be alive. And that this was a choice that we made and we had to live with the rest of our lives. And I think that was the hardest thing for us. I still struggle with our decision, but I know it was done because it was for her. We didn't want her to suffer the rest of her life. So that was the decision that we made.
Who else went through that with you?
My husband, and I guess my family too, but after a certain amount of time, we wouldn't allow family to come in and my kids. I have 2 other kids, my son Tyler and my daughter Lily, and they were able to meet their sister and come into the hospital and hold her. And after a certain point, we were very stingy with her. We wanted her all to ourselves. And in those 15 days, we never left the hospital. Our other children were being cared for by family. And we just thought, this is our time with her. My husband and I went through this, and he was fantastic. I mean, really supportive, and we had to make all these decisions together, which were hard.
What was the hardest part of the decision? Do you remember where you were most stuck?
I think it was the big decision to pull the feeding, to make that life decision.
Was that an irreversible decision once you decided to pull it?
No, it was not. And at one point, about 5 days into it, I had a complete breakdown and approached the head doctor on the staff and said, I just don't think I can do this anymore. It's taking longer than we suspected. To go through this, they gave her pain medicine, and that pain medicine started to fail. All the ports that we could give it to her were starting to fail. And so the doctors, hospice, everybody was struggling to keep her medicated so she wasn't in pain going through this process. But the pain medication was failing, and I, at one point, just had a breakdown, and I said, I think I want to take this back. And he totally said, we can do that, that's fine, but there's going to be damage from that, from her not having food for 5 days. The damage would just even be greater than what it was, and we had to sit down, and we called the neurologist again, and I had him talk through the whole report again to make sure that I'm hearing exactly what was going on. My husband and I asked for a printed report at that point so that we could read it every day and know that this is why we made the decision. It was such a hard decision to stick to because you had to watch it play out, and it is not fun seeing somebody, especially an infant, just wither away. And so it was a hard decision to make, but it was a hard decision to watch. As painful as it felt like living in hell every day watching that and thinking, why is she still alive today? Why won't she just go?